Shine.fm presents Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Here's Seth Tower Hurd.
Stronger Together, it's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Jason Bentsen joins me from Love Moves Us. We're going to be talking about trauma in children, how to heal from it, and also, even if this doesn't affect your family, the vast odds are that you know a family that's been affected in some way or is serving God through foster care. And so even if this doesn't hit your immediate core family, this surely hits somebody in your community. Jason, so first of all, how did you get kind of into this world of specifically of supporting foster families and realizing that they a lot of times have stuff to deal with and work through that doesn't maybe show up in a biological family?
Sure. Well, my wife and I adopted our first child back in 2007. He's now 11. And that kind of launched us into wanting to help other families adopt. Like after we did this was an awesome experience. We want to help people. And just through over a period of time, God really just showed us more about how families need support, the unique challenges that come with foster care and adoption. And really, we adopted again 4 years ago. And we waited about 2 years through that adoption, and God really just steered our hearts more towards foster care, understanding that there are tons of kids out there. There's over 13,000 kids in foster care in Illinois that need homes. And so God just used that period of time to show us there are children who really need homes. And so through that, with the foster care side of things and the adoption side of things and understanding the unique challenges that come with that, God just used that to show us.
Yeah, so the 13,000 kids, a lot of them are basically not in permanent situations then. And when you say that 13,000 kids need homes, can you unpack that for me?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, that's a flexible number there because there's kids coming in and out of care all the time.
Yeah.
But, and any given year, sometimes that's higher, sometimes that's lower. But these are all kids who have been removed from their biological homes for one reason or another. Usually neglect or abuse are typically the two most common reasons. And so they're removing them for the purpose of getting them out of an unsafe situation, in terms of putting them into a home where they can be safe and hopefully then correcting that problem and then returning those children back to the biological family. That's always the goal of foster care. I mean, that was really the outset, the purpose of it is to remove them and send them back. Unfortunately, that only happens maybe 50% of the time. Certainly within Illinois and even within nationwide, these kids go into foster care, and sometimes they either just end up aging out of foster care, being, bouncing around from foster home to foster home, nobody ever adopting them, or they become adopted through, by a family who's hopefully been fostering them. And usually that there's flex in that as well, but that's usually the family that gets the first dibs, if you will, of being able to adopt this child that they've been caring for.
Yeah. This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Jason Bentsen from Love Moves Us joins me. We're talking about foster care, childhood trauma, and specifically how to support kids and families that, could be in your neighborhood, they could be at your Thanksgiving table, it could be at your church. But odds are, is it safe to say almost everybody comes into contact with a foster family in a given year, right? Church family, something.
Within a church, most probably, yeah.
Yeah. So specifically, I know you've got some thing to say about, kids that have been placed into foster families and trauma, and specifically your organization, Love Moves Us, runs support groups for foster parents to have a little bit of a break to kind of, download and unpack the unique challenges that they're dealing with, because they're caring for kids that, that have trauma that wasn't inflicted by the foster parents, by definition.
Right. Yeah. And our ministry serves both foster and adoptive families because there's a lot of similarities or things that those families are going to have in common. They're not always exactly the same, but there's a lot of things that are that those families share in common. And I just use a simple example for myself who adopted a child as an infant. And I think many families who adopt infants think the same way that we did. And that's, I'm bringing this child home from the hospital, and they're growing up in my home, and everything's going to be great. Or I'm adopting a young child from another country, and it's going to be great. But the question of what happened with my birth family or what happened to my birth mom never comes up. That's never a question in biological family, right? And yet that can be something that a child deals with over a long or short period of time that they can cry themselves to sleep at. That just a biological family, that never happens. But that's something that can be fairly common with some families, and that's something that's happening both in terms of adoptive families and foster families. And depending on that, the age of the child, I mean, families that like to maybe pretend like they're just a normal family, whatever a normal family is. I think you're kind of kidding yourself there, because a child who's been adopted at one point or another is always going to wonder that question. And the question for us as parents then is, are we creating a safe place to allow them to explore and express that?
Yeah.
Because for the children, that's a really difficult position to be in, right? I don't want to offend mom or dad. I don't want to upset mom or dad, but I'm also wondering this. And so is it safe enough for me to ask this?
Yeah. Well, I encountered this in my own life when one of my best friends got married, and, kind of one of the questions his wife was dealing with leading up to the wedding was like, now I'm forming a family and I'm still trying to figure out this thing of my first family, quote unquote, not wanting me. And that's still popping up in the mid 20s. So it's, it's a question that doesn't really get dealt with in childhood. It's going to show up somewhere in the life of a child as they become an adult.
Exactly. And I think our responsibility as parents is to help them process through that in age-appropriate ways, as they grow and develop, because those things do change over time as well. The questions change. That's why we talk about adolescence and child development, right? The brain is elastic, and it develops and changes over a period of time. So there's going to be different things along the way that we've got to be aware of and be able to help them through and process.
Okay. Let's camp on the adoption thing for just a moment before we move on here. So, if you've got somebody in your family, you got somebody at church with adopted kids, just as far as being a good friend, a good support network, and knowing that those questions are going to, come up, what's the best way to be helpful, just to be a good friend, be a good community member?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the best way I know how to answer that is do for other people what maybe you take for granted, which that can be difficult, or that you wish somebody was doing for you. I know for many families, and it's certainly not all, but for many families, the support side of that is really a struggle. They either can't find anybody to watch their kids. They can't get a babysitter, or a babysitter doesn't come back. Just being able to get that break is a huge thing. Bringing them a meal periodically. Doing for them something that you have within your own skill set. Maybe, husband can go mow the lawn for them. And again, it varies for families, right? If they have one adopted child and they feel like they're doing okay, not a big deal. They got 5 kids, 6 kids, which a lot of foster and adoptive families do. Life's busy. And if they're in foster care, those kids have appointments. They've got visits with biological family. They've got usually psychological, visits or counseling or therapists or other things that they're going to. And so being able to offer rides, being able to take kids someplace. But those are all just a few examples of some simple things that people can do. And I just really think that the care piece, the babysitting, giving parents a date night or something is absolutely probably the single simplest and best thing you could do.
Okay. And so that takes some commitment, but it also is the biggest impact that you can have on people around you.
Oh, big time. I mean, it's always time Love equals time, right? And so for us to really be loving to somebody else, to be love to somebody else is going to require some time for us. But I mean, one time a month to give, somebody 3 hours out, 4 hours out, you can make a huge difference, huge impact that I know they'll be grateful for. Because I know families that they haven't gotten date nights for 10 years. 10 years they haven't been away from their children. So that's a huge and simple and easy thing that you can do.
Yeah. My wife and I are having our first here in a couple of months. And I mean, so the reality is kind of starting to set in, right? And I can't, that seems almost unimaginable that you wouldn't get a break for 10 years. And, the reality is not everybody lives near your biological family.
Right.
And so if you don't have kind of friends and church people and neighbors do those roles the biological family would, I can see how that could happen pretty easily. You can be like, oh, man.
Yes.
Man, remember 2007 when we went somewhere? That was fun.
Yeah, exactly. And it's you can joke about it. It is humorous in that way. But when I come across families and I hear that stuff, like, it's tragic and it's not uncommon. And the mistake most people make is they come up to somebody and say, "Hey, let me know if I can do something for you." Like, that's like church speak for, like, God bless you. You go on your merry way, and I'll go on mine. But if we really want to be love to somebody else, it's like, hey, I want to do a date night. I want you guys to be able to go out on a date night. What day would work for you? Like, be specific, be intentional and be specific. Don't ask, like, hey, what can I do for you? Well, I asked, because how do most of us respond to that?
Yeah.
Like, oh, we're fine, thanks. It's like we're just being polite.
Well, and if I can say that some people you kind of have to push them a little more than others to help them. I grew up on a working farm, and so I just very much grew up with an "I'll do it myself" mentality. And one time I had to move, and before I was married, I was single, and my roommate bailed on helping me move. And I tried to move a couch down 3 flights of stairs alone because I'm 6'6", and I figured I could pull it off. And that's how much I don't want to ask anybody for help ever. It didn't go well. That's awesome. I mean, it didn't crush me, obviously, because I'm still here, but it didn't go well.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. That's a big ask. That's a big ask right there.
This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. As we talk specifically about foster care, I've had so many conversations with people who say, I've thought about it, specifically Christians. Not that non-Christians don't do it, but a lot of Christians that say, I've thought about it. And there's a lot more people out there that have thought about it than have done it. And certainly it's not right for everybody, but I get the feeling that it's right for a lot more people than maybe have.
Yeah. That's tough to say. I mean, it's certainly, one of the things we want to tell people with regard to our organization as well is not everybody can foster or adopt. Not everybody should foster or adopt, but everybody can do something. When we look at things like, James 1:27 says, pure and undefiled religion in the sight of God is caring for orphans and widows in their distress. Well, does that mean you have to adopt an orphan? No, but you can do something to care for them or to help care for them, right? And so, my wife and I, we joke a little bit. I mean, we've got 2 kids, and we've adopted domestically, and we feel like we're somewhat of the minority within the families that we serve. We don't, there's not a ton of domestic adoptive families that we serve. Most families have more kids than we do, and those families that have a lot of kids, typically what I've seen in them is somebody who is very secure in who they are as a person. They were developed very well as a child under their own family, and they're pretty easygoing. Because you got to be pretty easygoing if you're going to have a lot of kids, right? I mean, life's going to be a little bit more chaotic. And if you're a little bit more uptight, maybe you should put the brakes on and try helping some others first. But certainly, more people need to step up. If God is nudging you in that direction, then absolutely, yes, you've got to take a step forward and do something, because this is something God has asked us to do as Christians, as the church. And we're in this crisis right now in the United States and throughout the world with orphans. And let's be frank, I mean, we don't call them orphans in the United States, but many of them are. We call them children in foster care. And that doesn't mean that all of the kids in foster care are orphans, because they're not. But many have had their biological, parental rights terminated, and they are orphans. And we can all do something to care for them, and we've got to take a step forward to do that.
And I've got to point out the grim reality here, and I think you can fill us in a little bit more here. But children who are not adopted ever, who age out of the foster care system, who never wind up with a family, in very large percentages wind up in prison for a long time. That's the number one destination for kids who don't ever wind up with a family, is they wind up being hardened criminals.
The statistics are sobering and not just for prison, but the vast majority of children who age out of foster care are going to end up either homeless, incarcerated, like you mentioned, addicted to drugs or alcohol, or even being trafficked or prostituting themselves, trafficked for sex and other things. So, I get emotional every time I talk about this stuff, because, the reality, the things that hang in the balance, so many of society's ills begin with these children. And if we can stop focusing our efforts on Band-Aids and start looking at the source, and the source is right away when these children are removed from their biological homes, to be light and love to them, to be Jesus to these children, to at least introduce them to the person of Jesus Christ incarnate through us, that hopefully, at least when even if they don't stay in our home forever, that we've made a difference, we've made an impact in their lives to hopefully help them down the road to not end up as one of those stats. Like the stats are just like, what hangs in the balance is way too big for us to take this lightly and just say, like, that's somebody else's problem, or that's up to the state to run, that's in Illinois, that's up to DCFS. No, like, this is up to us as Christians. That's why God said what he said. That's why God is a father to the fatherless, and we are to be him to others. So we've got to step into this if we're going to make any headway in any of these statistics, because those things are just going to grow and grow and grow more and more and more, because we're dealing with more broken homes, more difficult homes, and more children who have been hurt and don't trust and don't know how to love or be loved.
Yeah. Jason Bentsen joins me from Love Moves Us. This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. With the growing need for foster care right now, specifically with children being removed from their biological homes, that's getting bigger. I'm guessing that that's pretty closely tied to the rise of the opioid crisis in the United States, that we have much more drug addiction going on right now than we have in the past. And that's going to, just by definition, mean more children being removed from dangerous situations. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's all cyclical. So much of it's cyclical. So many of these kids who are in foster care, their parents were in foster care. And so it's a mindset, like, they don't know any better. They don't know any different. That's just life for them. And that's tragic to me. And so, like we said, they grow up in foster care. They get addicted to drugs. I end up having kids. I put myself in unsafe, and my children in an unsafe situation. And so round and round it goes. And somewhere we've got to be able to help them break the cycle.
So let's go ahead and talk about this for people who have thought about this, right? And maybe,
Sure.
There's a couple preliminary questions of, do you have the space? Can you handle it? Is this the right time? And if the answer is yes to all those things, and it's never gone further than, well, maybe my church does kind of a day on this once a year where you can sign up for some information. I didn't sign up last year. What would be that next step to at least find out more if this is right for you?
Yeah, there's a couple things I think you can do. Talk to a family that's doing it. Have them over for dinner. Contact a couple agencies, go to an information meeting, explore that a little bit more. But I mean, we have families who are entering into foster care or adoption who attend our our family gatherings, our Love Moves Us family gatherings we do once a month. And that's something that I never anticipated, honestly, of what we do, is seeing families who are beginning that process. And they have, by and large, told me how helpful and valuable it is, because they get to see the reality and not the rose-colored, portrait that somebody has painted of what things are supposed to be. They get to hear from actual families who are living it, and the joys and struggles.
This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. Jason Bentsen joins me from Love Moves Us. We're talking specifically about the needs of foster care kids and adoptive families as well. Okay, so going to zoom back out to the church level here, to the neighborhood level. If this isn't right for you, but the odds that you're going to run into a foster/adoptive family, church, school, neighborhood, they're overwhelmingly high. I mean, if you don't know somebody like this, you're probably in the extreme minority, even if you don't know that family well, right? So kids that have been through trauma, that are healing from trauma, which can take years, right? Those kids are in the classroom, they're at church camp, they're, at different church and neighborhood functions. Why is it so important for the larger community to understand what childhood trauma is and what it does, and how we can appropriately respond? Because for friends that I've seen go through the classes for this, you really can't relate to a child that's been through trauma in the same way you relate to a child that's not been through trauma.
Oh man, that's such a good point, Seth. I'm glad you brought that up. It's huge, because that's the main thing that we kind of drive forward with the families that we interact with, is say, you can't parent these kids, you can't educate, you can't correct these kids in traditional ways, because it just doesn't work. And it doesn't work because there's no trust there. They haven't been able to trust the very people in their lives they were supposed to be able to trust. We're supposed to be able to trust our parents, and they couldn't do that. So just because they're in a safe situation doesn't mean they feel safe. And when you don't feel safe, you respond to things differently. And so we've got to start looking at these children and their behaviors and understanding that there's something behind that behavior, and stop just looking at the behavior itself, because there's something that's driving it, and we've got to try our absolute hardest to figure out what that is and to accommodate, to help make them safe. The thing that's most tragic for me is seeing these kids come into our churches. And they go into Sunday school, they go into other classes, and if your church has a security system, you get a name or a number and stuff, you have trouble with those kids. What do? We call that kid's parents back in by ringing up that number. The parent has to come get them. We end up kicking these kids out of church, the one place where they are supposed to be safest and know Jesus and come into contact with Jesus and learn about Jesus, and we're kicking them out because we don't know how to deal with them. And it's sometimes just as simple as somebody just not being educated or understanding that, hey, it's story time. I need you to sit still and be quiet. And they can't sit still. It's not that they won't, they can't. And actually, they might learn better if they're bouncing around the room and listening. That's true for many of these kids. And that's just one example. But, there are risk factors for when we're talking about trauma. There's risk factors for these children, and it's not limited to just kids who have been adopted or foster care. A difficult pregnancy is a risk factor for these children. That's a traumatic thing, going through a difficult pregnancy. A difficult birth, early hospitalization. Those are traumatic things for children. Think about an infant dealing with any one of those or all three of those things. They're going to have a difficult time. And then there's the obvious. There's the abuse. There's the neglect. And then the sixth one is just other trauma, witnessing something in their life that causes their child's developmental trajectory to change, to stagnate, maybe to flatline or go lower. Those are all things that are risk factors for these children. And unfortunately, it's like an unseen disability is what it is. We have families who have children who are missing limbs or in wheelchairs, and they will tell us, like, people will fall all over themselves to help these children. And by and large, this family's doing pretty well, because that's the majority of what they have is that, and they're doing fine. They've adjusted, they're doing well. But it's these kids who have gone through some extreme trauma that nobody sees, and nobody's falling all over themselves to help them.
Yeah.
Because you just don't see it.
Well, if I can give a real world example there from my own life, I have a life-threatening allergy to nuts. If I eat nuts and don't get medical care, I'm going to die in 3 hours. That's about how long I have.
Wow.
Nobody blames me for that. Nobody blamed me for that as a child. Nobody was like, oh my gosh, this kid's in my kids class, and like now I can't bring like the kind of cookies I wanted for my kids. I mean, I just would rather have the second grader die so my kid can have whatever snack he wants, right? Like, nobody was like that. You would be a sociopath if you acted like that,
right?
However, when it's not as obvious or it's not physical, a lot of times it's easy for other adults and other kids to be more hardened, less understanding of why this is going on. And I actually think that as American culture, we are getting to the point where we understand that that mental health is health, just like anything else, and we don't necessarily look down on somebody anymore. Would look down on somebody who broke their arm. I mean, we're getting there. At least that idea is out there now. Yeah, absolutely. I think we're getting there for sure. There's still a long way to go. And, for these kids, a lot of times it just looks like they're being jerks. It just looks like they're obstinate. They're trying to be controlling. And frankly, they are trying to be controlling because their life has been out of control. They're trying to control anything they can in their life because their world is out of control. Nothing has been in their control. They're trying to put an anchor in something, essentially.
Yeah. If I can control anything, I'm going to try. And so us being able to kind of negotiate with them, because let's be honest, as adults, like that's one of our highest needs and values is being able to negotiate our needs as an adult, right? Well, we've got to be able to teach these kids the same thing, not just my way or the highway. We're not doing them a service because they don't know how to negotiate. They're doing the only thing that comes natural to them, and it's a survival response. It truly is a survival response. For many of these children, if they couldn't be in control of this, they feel like they will die.
Wow. Yeah,
and that changes perspective, right?
Yeah.
It changes your perspective. If you could put that in the back of your mind, you're dealing with a kid and their behaviors and going, okay, they're doing this because they feel like they might die. What's driving this behavior? What's behind this, and how can I help them? And so we're trying to partner with more churches to be able to raise awareness to this, to bring education to this. We do trainings. And more so than anything, you talk about, families that you've come into contact with regard to, foster care or adoption. So, the average church size in America is, 100 to 200 or less. And most of those churches aren't going to have necessarily a very high percentage of foster care or adoptive families. And so why would we require them to, do a foster care or adoption ministry? Like, that'd be ridiculous. There's one family there, and everybody in that church just kind of maybe care for that family, right?
Yeah.
But to come together, what they often feel is isolated. They feel like they're the only ones dealing with their the things that they're dealing with. They need to be in community with other families who get it, who experience that, and that's what we're doing. We want to partner with churches to be able to bring these groups to more areas to serve more families.
This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. Jason Bentsen joins me from Love Moves Us. The website is lovemoves.us. So we've got a couple different things that people are moved by this, or they need help. They can get involved in a family support group if they are fostering, or if you're just somebody at a church that realizes your church needs to pay more attention to this. How can they get connected to you guys? Just hit you up on the website, or what's the next step there?
Yeah, can go to our website. We've got a couple of contact forms, our phone number, emails on there. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We've got a Facebook page that you can like us there as well. But again, like what I just kind of talked about, I mean, if you're somebody who wants to see this happen in your area, I mean, we're actively partnering with other churches to start new groups all the time. We're starting another group up in Crystal Lake next week. We're going to start one in Elmhurst in October, one in Munster. And we're looking to start one out in Aurora. But frankly, I mean, the groups that we have are filled to capacity. And it's not because I'm a great marketer, although I like to sometimes think that, I do an okay job at doing that. But it's because word of mouth. Families typically know another family, and they're telling other people, and their experience has been good, and they enjoy what they're getting. And so we need to see more groups starting so we can help more families. We're closing the registration to our groups because families are flocking to us, and we're filled to capacity, and we can't take anymore. And so we try to make it like a small group where we can have discussion with the adults, and we're ended up taking 16, 17 adults. That's not a small group. But we're trying to help as many families as we can. We just don't feel like we can take any more than that. Not to mention all the kids that come with that, because we provide volunteers to watch the kids for the adults, so they get a little break. So that's a great way people can jump in, is to volunteer for a local group that we've got. We've got one in Joliet, one in Frankfort, one in Tinley Park, one in Bourbonnais, and in Shanahan. And so you can volunteer at a monthly family gathering. It's one time a month. You'd be doing a huge service to the families, fostering adoptive families in your community.
This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. Jason Bentsen from Love Moves Us has been with us here. If you want some more information, particularly if you'd like to get your church involved in this, and you can go to lovemoves.us, or if you missed any part of this conversation, you can search Shine.fm on Facebook or YouTube, or Shine.fm podcast wherever you subscribe to audio. You can grab the entire episode there to hear the full conversation, as well as grab the links on how to get involved in this. This is Shine.fm.
That was Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Subscribe to the Shine.fm podcast to catch every episode of Stronger Together, available on the iTunes podcast app and wherever podcasts are available.